Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about how author Harper Lee was a culture vulture who got rich off of black pain with the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, I believe that the viewer is coming from the perspective of today and not the times of 1962 when To Kill a Mockingbird was published and doesn't really understand the aspects that went on as related to the subtle politics transpiring in the publishing industry. Now, when it came to the publishing industry during the times of 1962, America was still under Jim Crow, and with America still under the racist policies of Jim Crow, the publishing industry wasn't really interested in going out here and writing and telling the stories of foundational black Americans. I mean, even today, they're not really interested in publishing the stories of foundational black Americans, but back then, there was no black-owned publishing house that was out here looking to publish our stories, and the only publisher that was out here was Johnson Publications, which was run by John H. Johnson, and he was running a magazine publishing house, and he wasn't really publishing literary work at the time. Now, when it came to publications that featured black people during the times of Jim Crow, you usually got several kinds of stories. One type of stories were these dime store pulp stories that often were salacious and featured black men as these kinds of brutes that would go out here and lust after white women and wound up either being shot and killed or lynched at the end of the story. Other stories either featured a black woman who was a Jezebel who eventually wound up lusting after a white man and then having a biracial baby, and others featured stories such as those that featured the tragic mulatto, a biracial black person who longed to be white, and if they could not be accepted by white people, they would wind up killing themselves or they would meet some other tragic fate. These were the stories that usually came out of the salacious publishing houses, and out of the mainstream publishing houses, you would get black bootleg authors like Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright, who would go out here and present white people with their ideas of black, such as the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, where we get the Janie Crawford character, who basically is one of these biracial black women who we're told is black, and told the tragedy of why she could not get success as related to her marriages. And we would also get stories like Richard Wright, which would repackage the brute in a more literary fashion in books like Native Son. And the reason why we would get this kind of literature is because the publishing industry in America and the West is controlled by the media arm of white supremacy, and the media arm of white supremacy is all about promoting anti-black racism in between the pages of its literature, and promoting that anti-black racism in between the pages of its literature to program people's minds with ideas about black people. So when it comes to the publishing industry, I want to give the viewer some perspective. When it came to the publishing industry, they always got rich off black pain because black pain was a core part of their business, because most of the racist white readers and non-black readers, and even some of the self-hating black people like the bootlicks, they basically want to hear certain narratives regarding black people, and they only want to hear certain stories that fit their perspective. Because when it comes to the publishing industry's whole goal is to continue, again, promoting the ideals and the values of white supremacy, and that's seen all throughout their literature, which oftentimes presents you with black people who are miserable and downtrodden, black people who are complete failures, black people who are complete losers. This is what they present in their media. And when it comes to the book To Kill a Mockingbird, it basically fits into that whole pattern of publications that have been published as related to black people and as related to the salacious dime store pulp books and the books like Their Eyes Are Watching God and the book Native Son, which basically all came before To Kill a Mockingbird. And again, it's all fitting into that anti-black agenda. And when the book To Kill a Mockingbird came along in 1960, it basically was this woman basically being the latest of individuals to get rich off of black pain and black culture, and never really was about giving foundational black Americans anything that they could learn and grow from. No, these books were basically published to go out here and make it where white leftists could go out here and say they were telling the stories about the racism that black people endured, and was their way of going out here and trying to get a pat on the back for themselves as related to telling our stories. And the only reason why they were out here telling our stories is because many black people just didn't have the money to go out here and start a publishing imprint like I did back in 2009 when I started the SJS Direct imprint. No, a lot of black people just did not have that money to go out here and start a publishing imprint at the time, because publishing back then was a business where you needed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to keep your operating costs on going. And you needed that kind of money because at the time, publishing was printing, and in order to run printing presses, you needed lots of money to be able to run printing presses. So black people back then, while there were not that many millionaires, again, there were not people who could run that type of operation. Moreover, it would be hard to get black publications distributed by a black-owned business. I mean, it would be very hard because most of the distribution of media at the time was done by white companies, and some of them were controlled by organized crime. And with that kind of racism going on, it was very hard to get media out here as related to our image. And that was why we didn't get our stories out there, but we really needed to get our stories out there. And the only way we could get our stories out there, sadly, because of all the racism that went on, was through many of these people who wanted to go out here and have a paternalistic view of black people. That was the only way we could get stories like Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God and Richard Wright's Native Son out there, because those people had the money to control the media, and those people had the money to control the narrative in an industry where, again, 90% of the books fail. And with 90% of the books failing, then it's hard to pull a profit, because it's always been a hard time to pull a profit in the publishing industry. So this story, basically, again, when it came to black people, that yes, this white woman was able to get rich off of the pain of black people, but the sad part is many black people, we just did not have the money and the resources to counter these narratives. And since we did not have the money or the resources to counter these narratives, what happened is these narratives were allowed to go on, and the media arm of white supremacy was able to program a lot of black people's minds as related to the suffering of black people without ever being allowed to present that counterpoint to give people a more objective perspective of how black people actually lived. I mean, when it comes to black people, again, we never got that opportunity to be able to control our media until I'd say just about now. I mean, in the days of print-on-demand technology, we are in a place where we can control our narrative, but the whole thing is during Harper Lee's time, what happens is again, this white woman was able to go out here and tell a story of black people's suffering, and she was able to tell a story of black people's suffering because, again, there was no way for a black author to get into those circles unless they were one, a black bootleg like a Zora Neale Hurston or a Richard Wright, who basically sympathized with white people, and two, there was no way for a black author to even get a story out there that showed a balanced picture of black people, because both white people and black people would not accept that kind of story. No, because people had been brainwashed by the media, the only black publications they wanted to see again were those salacious ones, or those ones like from self-hating people like Richard Wright or people like Zora Neale Hurston. They didn't really go out here and publish balanced pictures of black people, and that's the whole part that really is sad about the whole To Kill a Mockingbird situation, is that we didn't get any sort of real picture as related to the image of foundational black Americans in media. No, what we got from this story, again, was a white person's perspective of black life. And that white person's perspective of black life really comes from, again, a very paternalistic and voyeuristic perspective, and really doesn't give you a clear picture of racism or white supremacy, because you really cannot understand a picture of racism from the racist perspective. And that's where Harper Lee's whole picture gets twisted, because we're not getting a picture that's balanced at all. No, Harper Lee is one of these white leftists who basically was, again, writing about racism, and again, writing about racism isn't really doing much about it. I mean, these anti-black policies, again, they needed to be pushed back on, and again, the only person who could push back against them was black people. Yes, she did get attention on the issue, but it really didn't do anything because, again, the civil rights movement was going on, and as the civil rights movement was going on in the 1950s and 1960s, black people were the ones pushing back on the issue. And the whole thing is she was allowed to get rich off of black pain because the media arm of white supremacy, what they wanted to do was control the narrative as related to racism, and part of controlling the narrative as related to racism was being able to tell our stories and control the platforms that tell our stories. That's what they did back in the 1960s, and as she got rich off of this book, it gave nothing to foundational black Americans, like the viewer was saying. This gave absolutely nothing to us foundational black Americans, because one, it basically prevented our story from being told, and two, made it where the only historical canon and literary canon came from a white person. So instead of us getting our stories out there and getting a picture that was balanced, what we get is told that this is a part of the literary canon, and told is a part of the literary canon because it came from a white person. Now, what's going on here with To Kill a Mockingbird is no different than what went on with the movie The Help. The Help basically is like the movie, like the book To Kill a Mockingbird, where it's the story of this white female author in the South, and this white female author who's in the South wants to get the stories of these two maids that are played by Viola Davis and Octavia Spencer, and as she gets their story of racism, what this woman does is write all of this up into a book. Again, this woman was a culture vulture similar to Harper Lee, and this culture vulture basically wrote her book about The Help and got rich off of the two maids who basically raised her. And as she got rich from writing this book, she basically exploited those two black women who worked for pennies on the dollar, because that was one of the only jobs a lot of black women could get, because they had been pushed out of the job market due to Jim Crow, even though there were laws that said black women had to work, but this was their way of getting black labor for cheap. I mean, that's what was going on in the time of The Help, which was, again, the same time that this book, To Kill a Mockingbird, was published, and it's the same type of paternalistic view of black people, that an exploitative view where you're looking to exploit them and get their story and not pay them for their story. And again, The Help basically showed you how white women would go out here and write our stories and control the narrative of our stories, and then enrich themselves from our stories at their expense. And this is still going on in the mainstream publishing industry, which is controlled primarily by white women who do not want us to see stories about the black experience, don't want us to see stories about black people being human, or see stories from the perspectives of heterosexual black men. No, because these people, white women who control the publishing industry, want to continue controlling the narrative and control the media arm of white supremacy, they want to continue promoting anti-black narratives inside of their media. And their media, again, is not about going out here and showing black people how to empower themselves through their publications. No, they always look to get rich off black pain, whether it be books like The Color Purple by Alice Walker, which goes out here and shows you a black woman being abused and again traumatized by black men and demonizes black men, or books like Waiting to Exhale, which basically show you an educated black woman not being able to get success in life by being married. It's always about presenting images of misery and pain of black people in between the pages of their publications, and it's not about giving black people anything, especially foundational black Americans, because with literature gives black people things. One, it gives black people a snapshot of history to show them life at a time and educate them on the legacy of their ancestors. Two, literature shows you how life works and shows you how the world works and gives you a picture of yourself at a time. And three, literature allows you to think critically about yourself. And four, it gives you an image of yourself. And this is why the white supremacist wants to control the narrative as related to your stories, because by controlling the narrative as related to your stories, what they do is create the image of you. And as they create an image of you, this can either motivate you to aspire to be better, or it can just discourage you and keep you in a place where you're at the bottom. And what the media arm of white supremacy wants to do is program an idea in black people's minds that they're failures, that they're losers, and make it where you only think of yourself as never being able to achieve or accomplish anything. And as you read this literature, what happens is this programs this idea in your mind, and it eventually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is what I observed from looking at the literature that was, as I was trying to get my own books to the publishing market, because back in the 90s, I thought people wanted to see positive stories about black people when Bill Cosby created The Cosby Show, and I thought black people wanted to see this when I was watching the golden age of cinema. However, that was an anomaly that was going on. It wasn't the actual picture of the media going on as related to the system of white supremacy. No, they like to see black people failing, black people losing, black people dying, and that's why you really cannot get involved with the publishing industry, because again, it's about promoting toxic anti-black media between the pages of its publications. It's about promoting anti-black media where black people only get to see themselves failing, black people get to see themselves losing, black people get to see themselves dying, and it can have a very negative impact on your mind and your perception of self if you imbibe this media. And what's really scary is a lot of this media is basically taught in schools like To Kill a Mockingbird, Richard Wright's Native Son, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God, and Alice Walker's The Color Purple. I mean, these books are considered to be literary canon as related to the black experience, but what happens is that, again, your kids read this stuff and they start to create this negative perception of self, because all you see are the lead characters failing or the black characters dying, and it gives you a picture that makes you think of yourself as less than, and that's all part of the programming that white supremacy wants to do as it gets rich off black people's pain. What they do is, again, as they're publishing these books and selling these books, they get rich off of black people's pain by, again, destroying the minds and the perceptions of self of black people, giving black people low self-esteem and low self-worth, and makes it where, again, instead of them looking to achieve and be the best, They see the worst about themselves, and this is why we really have to get away from these kinds of literature, from the literary canon, because the literary canon is anti-black and is not about creating an empowerment mindset in black people. And that's why a publisher like myself is essential for the development of young black children and black people overall. The SJS Direct imprint is a place where black people are presented in a positive light. Black people are presented in a humanized light, and you get to learn all about literature and the whole literary experience, and learn about literary elements such as irony, foreshadowing, symbolism, but you learn about it in a positive place where you see black people presented in a balanced perspective. And as you see black people presented in a balanced and humanized perspective, what you are learning is to feel a sense of self-worth, feel a sense of empowerment, feel a sense that you can accomplish something, feel like you are somebody who can go out here and do. That's what you get when you read an SJS Direct book, and it's one of the reasons why I started my publishing imprint, because I saw the negative aspects as related to media on the black mind. I saw the negative aspect as related to books like those, like such as The Native Son and To Kill a Mockingbird, and their eyes are watching God on black people and our perception of self. And these type of literature and these kind of images, again, promote the self-hatred that undermine our ability to compete in the marketplace and the world. Because if you don't see a value in yourself, then how can others see what you're doing as valuable? Again, critical question I have to ask people regarding things. I mean, when you rush and read the right kind of media, it gives you a strong sense of self. And I've had viewers and readers tell me that when they read a book like an ISIS series or a John Haynes series or an Esteem series or even a book like Spellbound or books of the Spinsterella trilogy or Eternal Night, it basically makes them feel better about themselves. And especially the kids, when the kids read them. I've had fathers tell me that when their kids read these books, it basically changes their perspective of self. And that's one of the things that good black literature does. And that's how you fight back against the culture vultures, who again have been getting rich off of black pain since the inception of the publishing industry. Because back then, again, we didn't have the money to control our image. But with print-on-demand technology and costs getting lower, we do have that money to control our image and control the stories that are told about us. And we have that power at this point. But sadly, a lot of people don't want to capitalize on that power because sadly, we've got a lot of black folks who are filled with self-hatred. And since they're filled with self-hatred, they don't want to give back to foundational black Americans the way I try to do on the SJS Direct imprint. Part of what I try to do here on the SJS Direct imprint is try to give back to foundational black Americans by presenting us with a positive picture of ourselves, because us having a positive picture of self gives us that ability to see someone who looks like us in the center of our own story, not in the background like in a Harper Lee story or many of the other stories. And as we are in the center of that picture, we are presented as intelligent, presented as successful, presented as confident, and presented as loving ourselves. That in and of itself, again, is essential, again, a foundation of values that black people do need. I mean, foundational black Americans, we need these kinds of images and ideas because these are the things that allow us to get inspired and inspired to do better. Because when we control our media and go out here and present narratives of ourselves, that is something, again, is a great contribution, because this is what it will inspire our kids to do better and be better and see ourselves as part of our own world and not a part of a white supremacist world where we're at the bottom of somebody's world and in the background of their world, but the center of our own world, a world where we are the ones taking power. And this is where some people got upset with me when I did this book, John Haynes, Godbreaker, when I showed the John Haynes character holding Thor's hammer. They got upset about that image because it was an image showing a black man taking power and taking power away from one of the gods that white supremacy likes to use to say how powerful they are, and breaking the idea that white supremacy is a god over black people's minds. That was what really upset a lot of black people, but we have to get out of that mindset because, again, these people get rich off of black pain. They get rich off of black people being at the bottom. This is how they maintain their codependent relationship with us and have the power over us. But when we start making our own media, and that's what new black media is all about, creating new black media that presents us in a new perspective where we are the ones taking power, we are the ones taking charge, we are the ones taking the lead, we are the ones not listening to somebody else tell us about our story. No, we're the ones who are going to tell our story, and as we tell our story, we are going to come at it from a perspective of objectivity that shows black people in the right light. And that's why we again push back against the culture vultures by supporting new black media like the SJS Direct imprint. And the viewer wanted me to talk about Harper Lee, but Harper Lee is just, again, one part of the institution of the publishing arm of white supremacy, which is a subsidiary of the media arm of white supremacy. And again, the only way you can, again, push back on culture vultures that get rich off of black pain is for black people to go out here and support new black media like the SJS Direct imprint, which want to give something to foundational black Americans, give foundational black Americans media that will inspire us, media that will uplift us, media that will help us learn how to think and get an idea of ourselves, to think of ourselves as capable and competent. This is what the kind of media that, again, can change the whole lives of children and basically change the entire culture of the black community. Now, this was a video that my viewer requested, and if you want to request a video, you can send a donation for the minimum of $15 to the Cash App or the PayPal by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up much of the publishing on the SJS Direct imprint that shows you a positive image of black life and will empower everyone out here and really gives back to foundational black Americans by giving us a positive picture of ourselves, you can pick up books on the SJS Direct imprint, such as the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my novel The Temptation of John Haynes, my black novel The Thetas, which is about a black sorority, and my black vampire novel Eternal Night. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, and you can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now in paperback, and you can get a digital version on Amazon.com along with my other comic, Esteem No Good Deed, which is just 99 cents on Kindle. And if you want to help me to continue being able to pay for the covers for SJS Direct books and hopefully get another SJS Direct comic out, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Esteem The Sands of Time. It's action and adventure in ancient Egypt in this terrific teen time travel romance. Get your copy of Esteem The Sands of Time at your favorite online bookseller today. Support black-owned and black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.